Hello, John.
Hi, John. How are you?
Good. Hang on, I'm trying to get my video to go here. Other apps, is it running? I don't know. Um, there we go. Hi. Can you guys see me?
Yes.
Hearing group. Is there something from what we talked about with Starling X and some other initiatives that could be applicable to the larger OCP organization?
I don't know.
Any
The
thoughts?
last I remember, I thought that Bijan was going to present to them and then report back, but I've not heard anything.
Okay. Yeah, I've not heard anything either. But when we had a discussion, I don't know, Friday. There's some other things too that I think supersede us in the Telco Edge group that are applicable to the larger organization. And I think we're trying to figure out how to kind of land those, if I recall correctly.
Yeah.
All right, so we're about five after. Um, is there anything we need to talk about from the OCP perspective before we get started?
Well, I know that the call for participation, I think, for the regional summit, I mean, the the global summit is now open,
Yep.
I believe. So most of that stuff has been announced. I haven't seen the details, but that's my understanding.
Yes. And it would be good. I think it would be really good if we could get some more participation from our Edge team into that, because I think what we're starting to see is that this Edge is starting to drive a lot of initiatives that get reincorporated back up into more or less the central OCP data center type of models. When we had the discussion with the DCMHS, that kind of started from a centralized perspective, but they looked primarily at the edge, which I thought was interesting. And I think we could bring a lot of value to the rest of the organization because we're all looking at these constrained environments, you know, concerns about temperature, power, cooling, especially now with adding kind of GPUs and other kind of accelerator cards, trying to do this in a constrained environment, but that also could feed back up into the larger environment as a whole. So that's kind of where I kind of see us being able to kind of add some value. And that kind of ties in with I think Deco, she kind of kicked a lot of this thinking off when she brought us Starling X, and we looked at that and said, "Hey, okay, yeah, that's good for Edge, but there's a lot of good thinking that's gone on there that could be brought into the whole OCP overall perspective, looking at how to do things, just not just from a far edge perspective or a midterm edge perspective, but also in a larger data center." So I'll stop there. Like, does anybody have any comments or thoughts around that? Does anybody have any kind of viewpoint on kind of, how what are our thoughts around edge coming from primarily we've been hardware centric, and we're starting to look at some of these more software centric kind of aspects. Nobody has any input. Somebody give me some input.
Hey, John. So I'll talk here briefly. We met at OCP last year at the Global Summit. I work at Natick, and we're more focused on the hardware type of things. So for me to give you software input probably won't help you as much. But I'm just now joining the call, so hopefully I can become a frequent visitor and be able to provide more input going forward.
Okay, great. Yeah, so we're trying to see, when we first looked at this DCMHS and looked at, what was happening from the larger OCP perspective, we were seeing a lot of requests from folks trying to do the form factors at the edge where they were needing to be able to swap out specific, storage, maybe CPU, memory, kind of these kind of things, but try to keep more or less the same form factor. And so, that kind of drove us to looking at, why we should look at this DCMHS, especially when a lot of the larger OEMs were starting to incorporate DCMHS into what they would call their edge offerings, but they were hiding it. So like if you opened up the box and looked, there was OCP kind of standardized connectors and whatnot, but that wasn't really kind of advertised as being that way. And so that's kind of where we got interested in, like, hey, maybe we should bring in and sort of condone, if you will, utilizing DCMHS in some of these edge deployments and kind of specifying how that should be done.
Mm-hmm.
So, Greg, do you have any thoughts there?
Yeah, I don't. I've attended this. I think this is my second time. So again, I don't have a lot to contribute, just kind of monitoring to see what opportunity might arise in the future. My primary background is in the timing, so precision timing protocol. And I know there is some activity in the industry to develop modules for that. So, just kind of monitoring to see where the discussions go, and then if appropriate, I can help out in discussions around that.
Yeah, that would be fantastic, right? So yeah, we're seeing a lot of that as well. Especially with kind of aligning with a lot of the work that we're doing on the telco side, because we're primarily hung under the telco group, but especially when you start looking at some of these other, and I'll bring up kind of this AI things that I've been looking at, is being able to correlate information that's being collected, in the regions, and being able to tie that back into the larger data set, if you will. So the timing is kind of critical in terms of being able to reincorporate knowledge and learning from an AI perspective. Not just in timing of specific hardware and all the things that we would need for the telco space. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, Greg, we definitely really would kind of value your input there and what you would kind of what you'd be interested in kind of contributing and providing to the team to kind of further this evolution. What specifically kind of are your use cases, or what are you thinking of?
So one of the main use cases, of course, is synchronizing the RF signals at the RRU, but then the BBUs, which are also in the ORAN split, called the distribution unit and the control unit, the CU and the DU. They need to have accurate timing in order to send the RF data out to the RRUs, the radio units. So that's one of the main precision timing requirements. But there's other use cases. There's industrial, for example, the utility companies, the power utility companies, when they are monitoring lines for faults, they need to have very accurate timing so that when there's a glitch, they can locate the fault within 100 meters. So then they can go out and inspect the lines. So that's like requires somewhere in the order of 100, 200 nanoseconds of accuracy to do that. So anyway, those are some of the precision timing use cases. And there's multiple solutions in the market. We provide one, and it is a combination of hardware and software. So you have to be able to DCO the phase lock loop that's providing the local time, but it's a software control loop that does that by monitoring packets that come over the internet. And so you're right, it's hardware and software. So there is an open software standard, PTP4L. There's a lot of proprietary servos, stacks and servos out there. Most of the major data center providers like Cisco, Juniper, Broadcom have their own stacks and servos. So,
well, and what's also interesting too is that I'm primarily out of Texas, so there are several people looking in sort of West Texas how to leverage the power grid when conditions are good for being able to collect and store and utilize power and kind of coordinate with the rest of the network, and then perhaps shut down when more or less coordinated to, or when conditions change. That could also be interesting as we're looking at this kind of larger ecosystem of being able to leverage the electrical grid and kind of coordinate that with other things that are happening across that grid, from a software and hardware networking perspective, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think there's advantages in controlling things like the power factor as well as loads.
Yep. Does anybody else have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, Bob, forgot it's the last meeting or the meeting before last. I was raised whether it's possible for this group to discuss about edge computing based on the Linux Foundation Edge, Elf Edge, has an edge, because there's a lot of different definitions. What is the edge? They have a pretty nice, clear definition. So based on that, can really go into a lot of detailed use cases. Not sure if that's still in the work. I mean, is that considered?
Yes, yeah. So Victor, that's kind of one thing I still have on my plate to do. I apologize. I've just been kind of consumed, since we had the last call, to start to kind of put together that proposal that we talked about, to really kind of break down what the different edge plays are, the different use cases. But kind of in that space, so one of the things I also wanted to hear from was what the rest of OCP was thinking, because when we looked at the DCMHS team, they started to talk about this edge scenario. So I wanted to kind of make sure kind of where the thinking was in terms of what we were thinking from telco edge and how that fit into this larger OCP, what they were calling edge space. So I think we made some progress on Thursday with the material that was presented in terms of what they're looking at from DCMHS and how that applies to what they're considering edge. And for them, edge has kind of been more virtual. It's been I don't know, Craig, maybe you could kind of articulate this better for me, but like there's not necessarily maybe a group. It's kind of more of a consortium of the rest of OCP thinking about this. And so kind of one of the takeaways from Thursday was, from an edge perspective, it's maybe more of a kind of virtual thing across a lot of different groups. But what's interesting is us being term edge hung off under telco. We're probably the closest thing to maybe a formalized concept of this, other than this kind of logical virtual grouping. I don't know, Craig, do you have any better thoughts on that?
I mean, I think that's still kind of the discussion points, right? From that meeting. I mean, I think that the DCMHS is wanting to form that edge group from a modular hardware standpoint, CPU, memory, those kinds of things. And so I think they're still looking for the wider group to discuss the use cases necessary for those to meet, so they can ensure that they're coming up with the appropriate modules.
But kind of my takeaway from that meeting on Thursday was that they would really like our group's input into these kind of use cases. That was kind of my takeaway from, I was kind of thinking what Victor talked about last month was, can we start to kind of formulate these things? And that could be a really valuable input that our telco edge group could provide into the higher level OCP team to make sure that whatever they're doing from a traditional data center perspective would cover some of these use cases, that we would come up with from the telco edge group. Am I misstating that, Craig, or any thoughts there?
No, good.
Okay. So Victor, I think kind of what we talked about last month. I think let's see. I'm gonna try to kind of regenerate that and kind of get that going now that we've kind of got, I think, the buy-in and the approach, because I think the rest of the OCP group feels that what we could contribute would be valuable to even like discussing how to split out and define these use cases for edge, if that makes sense.
Yeah, is there a documentation or information regarding what you mentioned, OCP discussion regarding edge?
Yeah, I don't know if there's so much discussion. It's just, or documentation. It's just been more discussion. I think I brought this up, kind of what you were bringing up from last month when I talked to the steering meeting and going and say, hey, we've got folks in the edge group that want to kind of drive these use cases and define them. Is there anybody else doing this? What's happening? What's going on with the rest of the team? And then looking at this DCMHS and going, okay, they're starting to look at some of this edge things, but it's kind of this virtual. But from what I was able to gather, and And
Hey,
you know,
but John, I think
ahead.
during that DCMHS call, Dirk actually used that same diagram that Victor was talking about from Linux Foundation to describe the areas that, you know, they were looking not to the IoT smallest size, but then the next up, even on the far edge, all the way then through the far edge to the start of the regional edge, or the data centers, the smaller data centers, was kind of that sweet spot they were looking at for making those modules. But it was interesting, he did use the same diagram in response to that.
Yes, that's a good call, Craig. So yeah, I you know now that you brought that up, I thought about that. So exactly. So you know, there's things, Victor, that you brought up that are connecting, but there's no kind of formal process. So you know, if that's something we want to drive from our group here, you know, I think we're you know we have the um, runway to do so, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
So
because
and
there are really lots of definition for edge until Edge create that report. That definition seems to be probably the most clearly defined, category of edge computing. I posted two links. One is to the Edge paper, including that diagram
yep,
for edge categories. The second is the recent news, AIPC. Everybody knows that. So once we see that, since we have a definition, then if we go to the page 3 of the Edge paper, so the AIPC is nothing but a smart device edge. So it's much easier to say, okay, within the current open compute ecosystem, what other technology could fit into the same smart edge use cases, and to make that use case even more valuable.
exactly. So you know, I think that's kind of where we're kind of at this inflection point where, you know, our team, we started out kind of driving what kind of came out of Nokia to kind of talk about this edge thing. But what I'm seeing is, you know, I think collectively we're seeing is that you all kind of want to drive this in another, you know, a larger direction beyond just what kind of Nokia brought originally. And, you know, we want to talk about software. I think that's what, you know, Deco, she kind of brought with Starling X, and you know, Victor, what you're talking about with these different use cases. And so what I'm kind of bringing back to you all is, you know, I think we're getting kind of the go ahead from the other folks in OCP to, you know, okay, if people want to work on this, let's go ahead and work on this. And you know, it really would be kind of driven by, you know, the contributions and things. You know, I can kind of orchestrate and foster these things. I can't do it all, right? So like, you know, if we can start to, you know, if you all want to kind of throw something out there, and maybe even the the email group, and we can start to collectively edit it. You know, I think we talked about, you know, before, you know, is there a way that we can kind of do this collaboratively? I haven't quite figured that out yet, but you know, what we do have is the ability to share stuff through the you know, the email gateway and kind of the group that we have, and kind of drive people to collaborate. So you know, I kind of want to throw open the doors to you all to say, hey, you know, let's collaborate on where we want to take this, because after all, this is, you know, this is your all's group. You know, I'm just the uh, facilitator to bring us all together. So I don't want to be the one to dictate what we're doing. I want to, you know, open it up and bring, you know, an opportunity for everyone to contribute, and, you know, figure out what's the best way that we can work together.
I think I want to clarify the reason I want bring up that Edge white paper. I'm actually not that involved in the Edge. I know that that's a very good definition, but those projects don't have to be. I mean, there are many edge technology that's not part of RF Edge. RF Edge, I think, just did a very good job defining what is edge computing. So a lot of projects are like in the CNCF, the other ecosystem that's related to edge, but not part of a actual RF Edge. Same thing here. I think that diagram for what is smart edge, what is constrained device edge, those concepts can be leveraged to define what is the in the open computing ecosystem, what's related technology, maybe resulting in a white paper, but doesn't have to mention anything about the RF edge if they're not related at all.
Right. Right. So I think we kind of when we talked at the beginning of the year, we talked about is our scope appropriate? So I think when we kind of stepped back and looked at the scope and our charter, everybody kind of felt that we had a broad enough description of what people thought this group could bring, and kind of bringing into what you're talking about, Victor, is I think that fits as well. So if we can start to perhaps kind of collaborate on some of these things, and kind of start somebody wants to throw something out there and people respond, I think that would be fantastic, and we can kind of drive it from there.
Believe it or not, the RF Edge ecosystem, they design really edge applications. So they actually love to hear what's going on out there. I was talking to them about what's the any latest foundational software technologies being developed in for example, the Kubernetes, so CNCF ecosystem. So yeah, they love to learn what's out there. Same thing for hardware, I believe, because if you don't know what kind of hardware, like the timing protocol appliance, if they don't know it exists out there for edge use cases, they will not be able to develop anything. So I think just by even a blog just to list those common open hardware specs, I think could be interesting to the other software ecosystems.
Does anybody have any thoughts about that? Want to share?
Yeah, I guess I'll chime in. Yeah, John and Victor, I think defining everything would be good. I think that just hearing Victor talk, our interest in NEDIC is a little bit different from an open edge space from what you guys are talking about. Like last year at the Global Summit, John, you gave a presentation about like open edge with the servers, the thermal cooling, and the potential of using liquid cooling and different things like that. So that would be more to where our focuses would align for open edge. So I think having like a tailored in definition, whether it's software, the hardware, or even down to the thermal cooling, like just a very clear-cut directive, I think would be beneficial.
So that's really interesting. So Lucas, you actually provided a lot of the input that I presented at the Global Summit. Do you have any thoughts there? I don't know if we can hear you. So John, maybe you could give us a little more kind of
Hi John. Can you hear me
there
now?
we go. There now I hear you. All
Sorry,
right.
my microphone was off here. Yeah, so I was working on that cooling perspectives for Open Edge, and I think sharing those specifications and those white papers would be really good. It'd be nice if the community was able to take that, and especially we worked on this kind of base spec for Open Edge. And if other members of the community could take that base spec and move it forward and develop it further, it'd be very interesting to collaborate on that.
Yes, that would be perfect. Lucas, I'll put my email in the chat, and we can talk about it further offline. I do know, like, even in the presentations that John presented, it had like Nedic technology within those presentations already existing too. So yeah, just like I said, like this would be our focus, and it's a little bit different from what John was mentioning earlier. So I don't want to hijack the call and take it to left field.
Yeah. Okay, John, I'll email you. Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah, so Lucas did a lot of work on the liquid cooling, and that was something I was looking into when I was out there in San Jose, is how they were doing that from kind of the traditional data center perspective, and thinking about how could we scale that down into kind of these edge deployments. Specifically, if we're looking at needing to add a lot of these accelerator cards, GPUs, neural processors, this kind of thing. It flips a lot of the work that we've been doing on our head, because we've all been looking at reducing costs, reducing power, reducing heat generation. And now if you all of a sudden say, okay, I want to put all of this AI and virtual reality on the edge, it makes all of this kind of crazy again in terms of heat and power, and makes the cooling issue front and center from these ruggedized environments that are not traditionally data center. So I thought that was kind of an interesting area that we could kind of look at from where we're at, that maybe perhaps the rest of OCP is not considering in these ruggedized environments.
Yeah, I agree. And like you said, like the definition between telco edge and how you exist within the actual whole OCP space. I know that there were some other um, server designers that were looking at edge designs with liquid cool too, like for one being Sienna, I believe, had like a design that they were kind of proposing, as you said, in the rugged environment and everything. So it's one of those things, like just trying to figure it all out and how it fits into the overall space. What does it look like compared to a traditional data center and the server types? What can be leveraged, what cannot, and different things. So it's still very early, but I think it's something that is going to happen, right? It's just the way it is.
So John, if I could kind of maybe challenge you, that could be maybe a good contribution that maybe you could provide, of like, what are the questions that you need answered? What are the questions that you think, need to be solved? If we could get kind of people to contribute these things into the group and then get people working on them, we could kind of build on it, right? So, it doesn't necessarily mean that you need to have the right answers. And, it kind of goes back to where Victor was going. I want to look at use cases. So, okay, let's make some contributions of use cases and proposals, right? So if we can start generating some of these contributions, and then we can start to drive some work in, our team and the telco team in the large OCP in general. But a lot of this is going to kind of depend on all of you kind of generating these different kind of contributions to kind of kick off what your thoughts are, and kind of get people to drive us input, right? Because then we can kind of talk about that on these working calls and whatnot.
Understood. Yeah, I think within the liquid cooling space, as you're probably aware, everybody's like trying to meet the AI demand with the data centers right now. Is it going to be air cooled? Is it going to be liquid cooled? And just it's a big demand there right now. But eventually, I don't think it stops at the data center. I think it does make it to the edge some way, somehow. It's just a matter of how do we incorporate it and what's practical and what's feasible too. Like one big thing, like you talk about the questions to be answered, is a data center, you can have a liquid cooling, like a liquid source, like a facility water system. But in the edge, how are you going to pump water, within the edge? How do you get it? And different things. So it's a lot of things that have to change, but some things can be leveraged as well. So that I agree. I think it's just getting the focus shift to not what's only happening right now, but what is also coming in the future as well.
Absolutely. So I think Lucas had done some contributions in this space, but what could be interesting is if people find this an interesting area to kind of build on what he's contributed, and we can kind of evolve it, right? So it's not to say that what Nokia or whoever has kind of put forward is the right answer. It's like maybe it's one piece, but I think what we all kind of bring is looking at this from a larger perspective, and getting other people's input, and driving some of these contributions that we can start to present to the rest of the to not only the Edge group but to the telco and OCP. When we have these different kind of summits and things to elicit other input from people with other perspectives, and kind of drive this to kind of a good solution.
Agreed.
So I'm throwing open the door. Like I would love if you guys are interested, just propose something, throw it on the email list. Let's chat about it. Let's talk about it. Let's evolve it. It doesn't have to be perfect, and let's kind of start some dialogue that we can kind of use these meetings then to work together while we're kind of chatting on that kind of email thread back and forth to kind of evolve some things. Because if we sit there and wait for these monthly meetings, it just goes so slow. I'd like to kind of encourage you all to contribute more into the email list, and let's get some dialogue going, if that makes sense. All right, so I'm going to stop there. Does anybody else have anything they want to talk about? All right. If there's nothing else, then maybe we can call it for this month. Last chance. Anybody want to talk about anything? Okay. Let's go ahead and wrap it. But I encourage you all, if you want to start some topic and we want to drive it, throw it out there on the email list. I think there's many more people on the email list than join. From what I'm seeing, we get kind of a mix of people joining monthly, so not everybody's on every month. So if we can start to contribute and have some dialogue on our email exchange, I think that would be fantastic. And maybe we could get some of these other folks that kind of join in different periods. Get everybody kind of more coordinated in attending this group, and we can kind of move some stuff forward. So, Craig, you have any last words? Any thoughts?
No, just that only about the Global Summit, the registration's now open in addition to the call for papers. So if anyone's interested in attending, they should go, do the registration process now. Hotel rooms go pretty fast for that. Other than that discussion today, like to see some more activity, obviously.
Absolutely. All right, everyone. Well, if there's nothing else, anybody have any last minute topics? Then I guess we'll call it a wrap for this month, and we'll talk to you all next month.
Thank you, guys.
All right. Bye-bye.
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 Thank you. Bye-bye.